Are U.S. Treasury bonds still safe to invest in?
Very much so. I think this is not an issue of credit rating. The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that video from our national hero, Alan Greenspan. That is from back in 2011, him talking about the solution to many things, which is to just keep printing money. Now, the last video I shot, I was talking about inflation, and I think most people, myself included, we do not understand inflation. We do not understand inflation the same way somebody who is born and raised in Venezuela or Argentina or Brazil or another country that has fought inflation tooth and nail for the last 50, 100 years would understand it. Being born and raised in a hyperinflation and a different sort of inflationary environment is very different than the way we got to be born and raised through a set lower amount of inflation. You know, even 2% in the United States is nothing compared to 5, 10, 14%, which many of these countries experience. Okay, so today we are going to talk about Kudlow's comments. We're going to talk about the IMF basically saying they don't have the firepower to withstand another economic crisis, and really just the overall problem that many people are facing right now, which is data overflow. It is overwhelmed from what is going on. Let's start at the top. I think the whole thing with politics and Trump, you like him, you hate him, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, right, left, everything that is just inundated, thrown at you all day long is meant to be a distraction. Because here's the truth, okay? To now try and change somebody's mind in the political space, the data stream is just too big. To go back all the way to the beginning and create this storyline and create an argument for any of these modern day points would take hours, days, maybe even weeks to describe the whole thing and break the whole thing down. It would take years to probably just try and collect that data and say it in a way that would make sense to somebody. By the time that's happened, they've lost all the recent data. So it's impossible right now to sit down with somebody and even attempt to explain one person's life or position or standpoint in something, in some sort of topic, and really look at it from both sides. Look at the contradictory comments they've made, the pro-con comments that they've made, how their decisions have been swayed or opinions changed throughout time. To lay out somebody's life to make a point, a political point, would take too much time. Yet most people are spending all day long fighting on social media trying to change each other's mind. All of that is stealing your focus. All of that is stealing your attention when the things that you should be focused on are the things that are going to help you and your family thrive. And it's as simple as that. While all those things are great and, you know, it's so easy to get sucked in, and that's the other thing. Like, if you could somehow use AI or something to compile this whole storyline, you are bound to trigger the listener at least 50 times from start to finish, of which would take you down this other caveat and this whole other trail of conversation, which would end up leading you so far off the route and the core point that you would never get to the finish line. The things that we're documenting and the way that we're talking about this, I believe, is helping people better prepare. It seems like now more than ever, there are so many amazing voices in this space all over the internet that are talking about these things that people should be focused on and should be really paying attention to. With that being said, now let's talk about what's going on right now. Okay, so I just wanted to bring this up to prove the point that inflation and taxation are, of course, very real, yet we've convinced ourselves and we've lied to ourselves long enough that they aren't that big of a deal. When, unless you are figuring out a way to completely remove the inflation amount, 2%, 2.5%, whatever, per year, the taxes that you're getting every year, unless you're figuring out a way to hedge that, those are all still considered losses. But yet most people don't look at it that way. In the last video I shot, I got tons of great feedback. Just read through the comment section on the last video. But I think a lot of people still don't understand inflation and taxation. We'll save that for another time. Let's start at the top here. Most people don't know this either. The BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, they set the rules. They set the rules for the feds. They set the rules for the central banks. And it might not be this direct, like they're the boss. It is more like this. They set out the rules and the things they would like to see. And the way they word it is in this way to where they can still play both sides. You ever notice how the IMF and the BIS play both sides of the disaster? They play both sides of the economic crisis every time. They, on one side, say and make all these suggestions of what the feds should do and what the central bank should do. But then they come and play the other side of it just as much, and they say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. They could always blame and say nobody's listening to them, or they didn't do what they said they should be doing, and they can always wiggle their way out of it. Remember, the IMF, the BIS, is filled with Ivy League level economists and people who have never actually lived in the real world, never actually lived in a real inflationary environment. They've never actually really lived in the real world. They are accountable to nobody. They are bankers, and they are making the rules. So remember that at the core, because if you want to go after political parties, I mean, the thing that should be really gone after is the people who are making the rules, which are creating the disasters that the political parties then talk about. So if we follow the snake all the way down to the very head, who's at the head? The fiat money system, the banks. And who's running those? The BIS and the IMF. Very interesting comments made by the head of the BIS here, Agustin Carstens. It's Mexican, so I can't get that accent because I can't roll my R's, okay? I actually Google searched him for the first time earlier today. Pretty interesting past. He was an economist that came out into the Bank of Mexico, made him about $8 billion through 2009 by hedging oil, and then he cut inflation through Mexico. He's basically looked at as a hero, and now is being brought on and been in the general manager of BIS since 2017. The International Monetary Fund does not have sufficient lending capacity to respond if a major new emerging market crisis affecting several countries erupted. That's what he said on Thursday. This leaves us with a problem of having inadequate resources and having to improvise in times of crisis. The mission of the fund is there. Carstens told a conference at the French Central Bank, if the fund cannot do it, others will have to do it. Otherwise, the economic costs will be huge, he added. Essentially, what they're saying is that they can't bail out if multiple countries were to go through a problem again. And that's interesting. That's coming on the back end of Kudlow, which is basically the White House advisor, National Economic Council director, whatever you want to call him. He's the White House economic advisor, kind of speaks on behalf of Trump, came out and asked that the Fed immediately make 50-point cut. That's interesting because we're getting into very, very low territory here at 2% inflation. The more that they cut, people are starting to figure out that all these interest cuts, they already abandoned their whole interest rate hike plan for the year, and they keep walking back interest rates. Now they're being asked to walk back December's rate hike, and people are starting to figure out in the general public, like, hey, maybe there's a problem. Even though we're hearing all these people on TV say that there's no problem, employment is up through the roof. We're seeing now over 40,000 jobs have been lost through all of the stores being closed, the retail sector being hugely affected in the United States, the ramifications of the trade tariffs that are still ongoing, and this trade war with China. All of this is having a ripple effect through the economy that it's either not being documented or maybe they are lying. Doesn't really matter. But the more these guys come on TV and say you shouldn't be worried, but we're going to ask for a rate cut, but we've abandoned our 3-year plan for raising interest rates, and we're not going to raise interest rates for this foreseeable future. When they come out and say comments like that, I think people are starting to realize that maybe there is something else going on here, because they're saying not worry, but yet they're asking to cut rates. Why? Doesn't quite add up. Anyways, here's the whole stream, okay, from start to finish. Donald Trump came out and said, had the Fed not mistakenly raised interest rates, especially since there was very little inflation, and had they not done the ridiculously timed quantitative tightening, the 3% GDP and stock market would have both been much higher, and world markets would be in a better place right now. So that's where it started. Donald Trump seems to always come out with very aggressive comments, and then people like Kudlow and other people that support him and are part of the White House come out and kind of walk those comments back. So that essentially happened, and then Kudlow came out and said, hey, you know what, we stand by Powell. We're not going to pull him. We're not going to, ask that he step down because he's our guy. And he kind of tends to walk back a lot of what, Trump tends to say, okay? So anyways, Kudlow said the White House wouldn't try to get Powell to leave his post. He's our chairman. Yeah, we're not going to displace him. Okay, I already said that. The Fed should not tighten because of prosperity, Kudlow said. Kudlow said that Trump economic policy worked on the supply side of the economy and was not inflationary. The central bank needed to recalibrate its thinking on what causes inflation, he added. Most of us don't understand what causes inflation. Even me sitting here right now, I can't even pretend to be an expert on this because it presents itself differently in every economy. economy, and it presents itself differently in the microcosm of the economy as well, right? Like we could sit here and talk about the fact that if you go to the airport right now, I was just at LAX within the last couple months, and there was the cheapest water I could get was $3.40 or 80 cents, and the most expensive was $5. It wasn't a super alkaline, amazing in a box type water either. It was just regular water. So they had like really crappy brand apparently for the $3 and some change, and then they had a really amazing, better version for over $5. Okay, and the woman literally started off by saying, as soon as I was about to grab that water, she said, "Hey, just to let you know that water is $5 and whatever." Most people decide not to get it, so I don't know if you still want it. And I stopped midway, and I said, "Okay, I'll decide to go with something else too." So inflation seems to sneak its way into economies, and a lot of times people aren't seeing it. Okay, so anyway, so that's a piece of it. And then what else did I want to show you? Oh, here it is. Trump last year said that the central banks had gone crazy with rate hikes, blaming Powell for declines in the stock market, and announced that he was not happy with Powell's loco decision to continue rate hiking throughout 2018. In response to the president's loco comment last October, Kudlow told CNBC that we all know the Fed is independent. The presidency is not dictating policy to the Fed. He didn't say anything remotely like that. So here's what I wanted to point out here, is that the Fed is its own independent company, brand. I don't even know what you would call it. The Fed is not accountable to anybody. Even though that the president and the government attempts to kind of paint this picture, you notice how they're always playing back and forth, right? Like the government blames the Fed blames the people. It can even blame the government as well. It plays this role that it's trying to help banks make the best possible decisions, but it can't save the banks, but it will, and it'll just keep printing more money. There's this circle jerk going around that allows every single one of them to both play the victim and try to act tough and act like they're the ones in charge and in control. And at the end of the day, you just got to see through that and understand that they're all independent people, and see that they're all independent organizations, companies, brands, whatever. And at the same time, they are all coming together. So I think a lot of this is just like for show, to make the American people proud that their president's trying to stand up to Powell and this big bad Fed, and then the Fed does the same thing right back with the 60 minutes and a damage control that Powell just did recently, and it goes on and on and on. So it's best to just look beyond that and look for the facts of what's going on, not what the talking heads are saying. So what is the data showing? And the data is showing us right now that even though these people are trying to come on TV and say everything's good, they would not be also asking for rate cuts if that were in fact truth. So the truth is that things are getting bad. The inverted yield curve hitting recently is an indicator, usually the last 3 times has been an indicator that within 12 to 18 months a recession occurred. There's all these other indicators as well that have been just popping right and left in the last 6 to 8 months that if you've been tracking and keeping an eye on, you would know all lead to one thing: recession. And we're seeing this global slowdown, this global pullback that everyone is talking about, yet most people I don't think are prepared for. Most people are not even prepared for one mini little disaster. And as I presented in the last video, there's a lot of expenses that people pay, and I don't think at the end of the day they realize where their money is even going most of the time. They just know at the end of the day they got none left. So my friends, this is a call to make a plan, if you're not already, for what you might be willing to do. Now, everyone has a different opinion on where to put it, but your money and what you're building in your portfolio is best suited in assets, okay? That is not cars, that is property, land, that is things that will always have a value. I would argue it's also metals. Silver is probably the easiest one for most people to get into because it's cheaper per ounce, and it would be easier to flip back into fiat and liquidate that if you needed to. Gold would be another one. I strongly believe in cryptocurrencies as well because it is a deflationary, decentralized asset. Well, Bitcoin is. Many others are not. But those are the things that you want that I believe will grow in value over time and preserve purchasing power, which is most important. So that's all I got for you, my friends, in this video. Be on the lookout. I've got some individual pieces I'm going to be dropping, drilling down into those from the last 24 to 48 hours of some things that I've discovered. So be on the lookout for those videos dropping on the channel. If you like what we're doing here, just hit the like button. That makes this video spread so much more. It's all just based off of the YouTube algorithm. So when you comment, when you like the video, when you share the video with your friends, it really does help this video get out more. If this is the first time you're checking us out and you found us through a playlist or a suggested search, go ahead and click the subscribe button, hit the bell notification. Be on the lookout, my friends. More videos dropping soon. Bye.